Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are, as we said before, this is week 16, but it's week number 1 in 2 Samuel. So that's what we're going to call it. Week number 1 in 2 Samuel. So if you have your Bibles, you can turn to 2 Samuel chapter 1. But if you don't, you'll be able to see it on screen too. Let's go ahead and share screen. Y'all ready? Okay. We're going to start off with a video. Ron, can you get that mic over there? There you go.
This one?
No, just that. Okay, so wait for our little prompt to come up here. There we go.
Yeah.
Can I get these from a website called
The Book of 2 Samuel.
Project.
Check out the video on 1 Samuel, where we were introduced to the book's 3 main characters, Samuel, Saul, and David, and then also to the book's literary design, which first introduced Samuel and then traced the rise and fall of King Saul, in contrast to the rise of King David. 2 Samuel tells the story of David as Israel's king, and in 2 movements. There's a season of success and blessing, followed by a huge moral failure and then its sad consequences. And then the book ends with this well-crafted conclusion that reflects back on the good and the bad in David's life, generating hope for a future king to come from his line. So 2 Samuel picks up after Saul's death, and David surprises everyone by composing this long poem where he laments the death of the very man who tried to murder him. And so once again, the author, he's presenting David's humility and compassion. He's a man who grieves the death even of his own enemies. After this, David experiences a season of success and God's blessing. All of the Israelite tribes, they come to David and then they ask him to unify all the tribes as their king. And so the first thing David does as king is to go to the city of Jerusalem. He conquers it and he establishes it as Israel's capital city, which he renames as Zion. And from there, David goes on and he wins many battles and expands Israel's territory. Now, after making Jerusalem the political capital of Israel, he wants to make it their religious capital as well. And so he has the Ark of the Covenant moved into the city. And then in 2 Samuel 7, he tells God, now that Israel has a permanent home, he thinks that God's presence should also get a permanent house. So he asks if he can build a temple for the God of Israel. But God says to David, thank you for that thought, but actually I'm going to build you a house, a dynasty. Now, 2 Samuel 7, this is a key chapter for understanding the storyline of the whole Bible. Because God here makes a promise to David that from his royal line will come a future king who's going to build God's temple here on earth and set up an eternal kingdom. And it's this messianic promise to David that gets picked up and developed more in the book of Psalms and also in the books of the prophets. And it's this king that gets connected to God's promise to Abraham. The future messianic kingdom will be how God brings his blessing to all of the nations. And it's right here in the midst of all this divine blessing that things go horribly wrong. David makes a fatal mistake, not fatal for him, but for a man named Uriah, one of David's prized soldiers. So from his rooftop, David sees Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, bathing. David finds her, he sleeps with her, gets her pregnant, and then he tries to cover the whole thing up by having Uriah assassinated and then marrying her. It's just horrible. So when David's confronted by the prophet Nathan about all of this, he immediately owns up to what he's done. He's broken, he repents, he asks God to forgive him, and God does forgive him, but God doesn't erase the consequences of David's decisions. And so as a result of this horrible choice, David's family, his kingdom, it all falls apart. And it makes this section a tragic story, much like Saul's downfall. So David's sons end up repeating his own mistakes, but in even more tragic ways. So Amnon sexually abuses his sister, Tamar, and then their brother Absalom finds out about all of this and has Amnon assassinated. And then Absalom goes and he hatches this secret plan to oust his father David from power, and he launches this full-scale rebellion. And so for a second time, David is forced to flee from his own home and go hide in the wilderness, except this time he is not an innocent man. The rebellion ends when David's son is murdered. and it breaks David's heart. And so once again, he laments over the very man who tried to kill him. David's last days find him back on his throne, but as a broken man, wounded by the sad consequences. The book concludes with a well-crafted epilogue, with stories that are out of chronological order, but they have this really cool symmetrical literary design. So the outer pair of stories come from earlier in David's reign, and they compare the failures of Saul and then of David, and how each of them hurt other people through their bad decisions. The next inner pair of stories are about David and his band of mighty men who went about fighting the Philistines. And what's interesting is that both sections have a story of David's weakness in battle. So in contrast to the victorious David of chapters 1 through 9, here we see a vulnerable David who's dependent on others' help. The center of the epilogue has two poems that act like memoirs, and David reflects back on his life. And he remembers times when God graciously rescued him from danger. And he sees these as moments where God was faithful to his covenant promise to him and to his family. Both poems conclude by looking back onto the hope of God's promise of a future king who will build that eternal kingdom. Now, these poems and then God's promise also connect back to Hannah's poem that opened the book. And so these key passages from the beginning, now the middle, and the end of the book bring the book's themes all together. Despite Saul and David's evil, God remained at work, moving forward his redemptive purposes. And God opposed David and Saul's arrogance, but he exalted David when he humbled himself. And so the future hope of this book reaches far beyond David himself. It looks to the future, to the Messianic king who will one day bring God's kingdom and blessing to all of the nations. And that's what the book of Samuel is all about.
Wow,
So that's like your movie trailer
that was good. Yeah.
for what we're doing here. So we're going into 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1, and just follow along. Don't matter what translation you have, because some of the translations will be a little different. We'll talk about those when that happens. But
Ron,
oh,
You
like,
get the
like.
like in.
There you go.
some of
We
us have a hard time seeing.
what we're using on here is the NRSV version, so
Thank
just
you,
for
Ron.
reference there. After the death of Saul, when David had returned from defeating the Amalekites, remember that happened last week? David remained 2 days in Ziklag. That city had been destroyed, remember? So on the third day, a man came from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. When he came to David, he fell to the ground and did obeisance. David said to him, "Where have you come from?" He said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." David said to him, "How did things go? Tell me." God? Oh, you got it. I'm sorry. He answered, "The army fled from the battle, but also many of the army fell and died, and Saul and his son Jonathan also died." Then David asked the young man who was reporting to him, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan died?" The young man reporting to him said, "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul leaning on his spear, while the chariots and the horsemen drew close to him." So y'all will notice that after every little section, I give a little recap and a little bit better understanding of what's going on. This guy has come into the camp with his clothes torn and dirt on his head. These are signs of distress and mourning, and that happens throughout the whole Old Testament, well, and New Testament too. They rip their clothes, they put ashes on their head as signs of mourning. So. And this is 3 days after the battle that Saul ended up taking his own life. So this guy is recounting he saw Saul there leaning on his spear.
He's also.
He saw Saul.
He's so.
When he looked behind him, he saw me. So Saul is still alive, guys. When he shows up, remember the armor bearer, he killed himself too. Oh. When he looked behind him, he saw me and called to me. I answered, "Here, sir." And he said to me, "Who are you?" I answered him, "I am an Amalekite." Oh, so he has run from the battle that David had waged on them. So not only Saul, not only did he run from, he ran from the battle that they were having with David at the time, and he ends up running into the battle that Saul was having with the Philistines. Oh. He said to me, "Come stand over me and kill me, for convulsions have seized me, and yet my life still lingers." So I stood over him and killed him. for I knew that he could not live after he had fallen. I took the crown that was on his head and the armlet that was on his arm, and I have brought them here to my Lord. So we understand here a little. I always look for comedy in the scriptures, and for some reason that God has gifted me with that, with that ability to see the comedy in some of this. We already know Saul in all his mighty military prowess that he could not throw a spear. He threw it and missed David, he missed Jonathan. He had his spear stolen when he was asleep on a battlefield, so he can't control his own weaponry. So he falls on his own spear, on his own sword. And he still can't kill himself. Still can't kill him. Now, at this point, like I said, the armor bearer is not even mentioned in this story, so the armor bearer must have died pretty quickly in all this.
He was better at killing himself.
The armor bearer definitely was, yes. Remember, because Saul had asked the armor bearer, kill me. The armor bearer, he swore an oath. He can't kill his Lord. And so Saul ends up taking it up on himself. Then after the armor bearer thinks he's dead, the armor bearer kills himself as part of that oath. If my Lord dies, so must I. So the royal symbols of the king here, the crown and the armlet, are proof of his death to David. But they also serve another purpose. Any thoughts? What other purpose they would serve? To crown the new king. Then David took hold of his clothes and tore them. Now remember what did that mean? Mourning and distress. And all the men who were with him did the same. They mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord, and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. So he's getting word that the Israelites lost the battle to the Philistines. David said to the young man who had reported to him, "Where do you come from?" He answered, "I am a son of a resident alien and Amalekite." David said to him, "Were you not afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" Remember, David still feels the reason David wouldn't kill Saul is because he felt that Saul was the Lord's anointed. So he refused to kill Saul, even though he had 3 opportunities to do so. So then verse 15, then David called one of the young men and said, "Come here and strike him down." Ooh, that's pretty rough. So he struck him down and he died. David said to him, of course, he's saying this after the guy is dead. So your blood be on your head, for your own mouth has testified against you, saying, "I have killed the Lord's anointed." So when they find out about it, they go through a mourning phase. The law required that this man die because he killed the king of Israel.
They killed the messenger.
They killed the messenger, yes, but they also killed the killer of Saul. But it also fulfilled God's command to Saul. And what was God's command to Saul? What the reason that the kingdom was taken from Saul to begin with?
No.
The command was for Saul to kill all the Amalekites.
All right.
Saul refused to do that. And so here, David has gone to battle with the Amalekites. So he's won, except for those 600 that ran away on the camels. Remember them? So this is the only Amalekite that remains. And David kills him to fulfill. So, I put that in quotation marks, to fulfill the command that God had originally given us to kill all the Amalekites. So, okay. Verse 17, David intoned this lamentation over Saul and his son Jonathan. He ordered that the Song of the Bow be taught to the people of Judah. So the Song of the Bow is probably a song by David himself. He composed it and then he's teaching it to them. It is written in the book of Jashar. We have no clue where that book is. So he said, "Your glory, O Israel, lies slain upon your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, or the daughters of the Philistines will rejoice. The daughters of the uncircumcised will exult. You mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor bounteous fields. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul, anointed with oil, no more." Jashar means victorious, by the way. I do that too. I like to put the meanings of the names of places of people because it kind of gives us an idea of maybe why they were named that way. Apparently this book of Jashar is a book of hymns, hence the hymn here. Continuing on, verse 22, from the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, nor the sword of Saul returned empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you with crimson and luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel, how the mighty had fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan lies slain upon your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war perish. Any questions on chapter 1?
So that's where the phrase, how the mighty have fallen. Yeah.
Well,
Or was it earlier?
it probably was earlier, but
It's just a phrase we still need.
correct. Well, it's because you're right. A lot of biblical phrases just come into our own vernacular. Even though we sometimes take them out of context or screw them up sometimes. So. On to chapter 2, verse 1. After this, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? The Lord said to him, go up. Okay. Well, we'll continue on. I'll ask. David said, to which shall I go up? He said, to Hebron. So David went up there along with his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, a widow of Nabal of Carmel. David brought up the men who were with him, every one with his household, and they settled in the towns of Hebron. Then the people of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. So, since David inquired of the Lord, what do y'all think was happening there? Y'all know how the Lord how they discerned what God was saying?
Yeah, those
The
guys.
Urim and Thummim, yeah. So it doesn't mention the priest Abiathar here, but my guess is that right, he's inquiring of Abiathar to check the Urim and Thummim to find out what God wants us to do. We call it a game of chance now, but they used it as a discernment for God's will. So here is finally a public royal anointing. Remember, they got the crown, they got the armlet, and so they go up to Hebron, which is in Judah, and they anoint him publicly, which is, we compare that to the private divine anointing that Samuel gave him when he was still in the house of Jesse. We all remember that. It's kind of a private thing. When they told David it was the people of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul, David sent messengers to the people of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed by the Lord because you showed this loyalty to Saul your Lord and bury him. Now may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you, and I too will reward you because you have done this thing. Therefore, let your hands be strong and be valiant. For Saul your Lord is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. So it mentions Jabesh Gilead. Remember what happened when Saul died? He was left there on the battlefield. Well, when the Philistines came and were cleaning up the plunder and all that, they found Saul dead. They take him, they cut his head off. They take his head and put it in the temple of Dagon. They take his body and they hang it up over the walls of another city. Well, Jabesh Gilead was who Saul had originally answered the call to protect early just after he was anointed king. He rounded up troops on a just few hours notice, went and battled off the attackers of Jabesh Gilead. Well, in return, they vowed obeisance to Saul. Well, when they discover that Saul's body and head have been separated and that it's being defiled in the ways they are, they go and retrieve Saul's body and they take it back and bury it the way it should be.
With the head? With the head?
No, never retrieved the head that we hear about. So, because that's over in Philistia. So. But David, because they showed this compassion to Saul, he is going to protect them as well. He is carrying on level of protection. Verse 8, but Abner, son of Ner. Okay, remember what Abner means?
We're not very good students.
Okay. Well, Ab means son of, Ab means son of. And Ner means, that's who's the son of. So basically, but Abner, which means son of Ner, if we read this as it means, but son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbaal, son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. So there was a son of Saul that survived. He made him king over Gilead, the Asherites, Jezreel, Ephraim, Benjamin, and over all Israel. You see, there's a problem going on here, right? Ishbaal, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel. He reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. The time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. Yes.
So the Saul's son was king over the northern kingdom.
It gets tricky because in the grand scheme of the chronology, it's been simplified in theology by saying that the United Kingdom of Israel was Saul, David, and then Solomon. And then when Solomon died, the kingdom splits into two. But we see, when you read scripture, you see that it wasn't that simple, because it wasn't united under Saul either. Because David, remember, he had the Judahites that were following him, but most of the Benjaminites, which funnily were, comically were Saul's own people. That's where he came from, was the tribe of Benjamin. So the Judahites, the Benjaminites, and the Manassites, remember them? They joined David while Saul was king over Israel. So there wasn't a united kingdom then. So when David takes over, we get a little weird. It gets a little weird here. Because if you follow the time, Ishbaal, Saul's son, is made king by the commander of the military, and he serves for 2 years. But David, remember, he's gone to Hebron. It says he was there for 7 years, 6 months, or they served for 7 years and 6 months. Well, that is because the way we resolve that is because Jerusalem had not been made the capital for 7 years and 6 months. So the capital of Israel at the time that David was king was Hebron at the beginning of it. So for 2 years, there's still a divided kingdom.
It kind of depends on who's writing the history, doesn't it?
Correct. Yeah. The history is always written by the victors, right? That's not in the Bible. Just clearing that up.
That's what Michael.
Right. Well, it's a someone's ism. Ishbaal means man of Baal. Mahanaim means 2 camps. That little prefix, im, sometimes you'll see it em. That means it's multiple. It's multiple. The easiest example would be Elohim, which means multiple gods. So more than one god, Elohim. Seraphim, you might have heard that. That's more than one seraph, which is a type of angel. Well, so im means multiple. So Mahana means camp. So by that we can say there's 2 camps, but multiple camps is what it literally means. Asher, yes.
So the Urim and Thummim, whatever, the dice, they're multiple too.
Correct, but yes, they are.
So there would be
Urim
more
and
than
Thummim, There
2.
might be more than
Oh, okay.
we don't know because Jewish tradition dictates that those would eventually condense down to this idea of the dreidel. If y'all know what a dreidel is, it's a multi-sided top or whatever that you spin. Well, depending on where it lands, tells you whatever's facing up is your answer. Yeah, it's what it evolved into. Asher means who is happy. That's not a question, it is a statement. That person who is happy. So a split kingdom here. David over Judah, Ishbaal over everyone else. Okay. Verse 12. Son of Ner, son of Ner. And the servants of Ishbaal, son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. Joab, son of Zeruiah, and the servants of David went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. So now we've got this meeting of two kings. One group sat on one side of the pool while the other sat on the other side of the pool. Abner said to Joab, "Let the young men come forward and have a contest before us." Whenever it says contest, this is battle, okay? Shoulder battle. It's the same word Goliath used, come up and contest with me. It's the same word.
Wasn't a swimming competition.
No, it was not a swimming meet. Let them come forward. Joab said, "Let them come forward." So they came forward and were counted as they passed by. 12 for Benjamin and Ishbaal, son of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David. Each grasped his opponent by the head and thrust his sword in his opponent's side. Boy, that's nice. So they fell down together. Therefore, that place was called Helkath Hazarim, which is at Gibeon. The battle was very fierce that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten by the servants of David. So, I mentioned here that David's headquarters were in Hebron for 7 years. Now, we've got here a 12-on-12 contest, and all of them died. That's the way you negotiated. And Joab, who is the commander of Israel, or commander of David's military, wins. Helkath Hazarim means field of heroes. Okay. We don't know who's hero. Field of heroes. Verse 18. The three sons of Zeruiah were there: Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Do those names ring a bell? Joab is the commander of the military, obviously, but Abishai and Asahel are members of David's mighty men, the 30 mighty men. So now Asahel was as swift of foot as a wild gazelle. Asahel pursued Abner, turning neither to the right nor to the left as he followed him. Then Abner looked back and said, "Is it you, Asahel?" He answered, "Yes, it is." Abner said to him, "Turn to your right or to your left and seize one of the young men and take his spoil." But Asahel would not turn away from following him. Abner said again to Asahel, "Turn away from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I show my face to your brother Joab?" But he refused to turn away. So Abner struck him in the stomach with the butt of his spear, so that the spear came out in his back. He fell there and died where he lay, and all those who came to the place where Asahel had fallen and died stood still. Asahel means made by God. So we're reading this story, and y'all went ooh when y'all heard the detail of that death there. Abner strikes Asahel with the butt, with the blunt end of his spear, and it penetrates all the way. That tells you the force that was used. Okay. I will say that even in the tragedy of all this, again, I see the comedy in this. I want you to picture for a moment, you've got Abner, his 12 men, well, all of them have died, but Joab's forces jump up and start chasing Abner and all the men that are there. I want you all to picture the theme from Benny Hill. Abner is running along, he's running along, and Joab, or Asahel here, is chasing him and he won't deviate. He's on his tail. He's as swift as a gazelle, it says here. He's on his tail. He won't deviate anywhere. Abner's yelling over his shoulder, "Don't chase me, go chase him." And Abner at this last, he's telling him over his shoulder, "Look, don't, you strike me, don't make me kill you." Abner's pretty confident here, even though he's the one being chased. "Don't make me kill you, because how am I going to face your brother?" And he's left with no choice. To protect his own life, Abner kills the brother of Joab.
So if he was running so swiftly, all Abner had to do is stop and hold his sword there, and then he skewers himself on the end of it.
Great analogy.
That's the force.
Yep. So, on to verse 24. But Joab and Abishai pursued Abner, So here's the other two brothers. Joab, the commander, and Abishai, one of the commander of the mighty men, pursued Abner. As the sun was going down, they came to the hill of Ammah, which lies before Giah, on the way to the wilderness of Gibeon. The Benjaminites rallied around Abner and formed a single band. They took their stand on the top of the hill. Then Abner called to Joab, "Is the sword to keep devouring forever? Do you not know that the end will be bitter? How long will it be before you order your people to turn from the pursuit of their kinsmen?" Joab said, "As God lives, if you had not spoken, the people would have continued to pursue their kinsmen, not stopping until morning." Joab sounded the trumpet, and all the people stopped. They no longer pursued Israel or engaged in battle any further. So Abner, in this one brief moment of logic, they set up their last defense. And they yell out to Joab, "Hey, look, we're going to keep fighting because we're just going to end up killing each other. Let's just stop this." Abner is not a very logical person, but in this, I guess God spoke to him at that moment, and all of a sudden Abner was like this. Remember, Abner was responsible for David's men getting into the camp where they all slept and stole Saul's spear and water pitchers. Ammah means my people. Giah means to guide. So Abner basically tells them, "Let's not allow any more to die today." Joab agrees.
I'm having a hard time keeping the good guys and the bad guys separated here. Joab
Is David's.
is David's guy, and Abner is
Well,
The son.
Ishmael.
Yeah. the unknown son of Saul.
Yes.
So. It's rendering his name as Ishbosheth.
Ishbosheth, yeah, it depends on the translation. They mean the same thing.
So they sort of call a truce here, is that what happened?
They call an end to the battle. We're just gonna end up killing each other, just like those 12 on 12 did, when they all 24 died.
Oh, wow.
And so they're just gonna end up killing each other.
Oh.
So,
They each, everybody had a sword.
right. They're all skilled. On to verse 29. Abner and his men traveled all that night through the Arabah, through the desert. They crossed the Jordan and marching the whole forenoon, they came to Mahanaim. Joab returned from the pursuit of Abner, and when he had gathered all the people together, there were missing of David's servants 19 men besides Abner. But the servants of David had killed a Benjamin 360 of Abner's men. They took up Asahel and buried him in the tomb of his father, which was at Bethlehem. Joab and his men marched all night, and the day broke upon them at Hebron. So the death toll, not counting those two groups of 12, Joab lost 7 guys. Abner lost 300. At least according to these texts.
And where is David?
David is
He's back home.
question. He's back in Hebron. Yeah, remember he's king now.
So he sent Joab.
Correct. There was right. I can agree that possibly there was an idea that they were communicating with each other, saying, "Hey, let's meet up and let's have negotiations." And those negotiations turned into a 12 on 12 contest, which then just further went bad. So the Kings wouldn't have done that. They would have done that through their both of these groups forced march of about 14 miles, both of them through the night. So just an idea, if you ever walk 14 miles.
In the night.
During the day, military. Yeah, we had to do 7 road marches. You had to complete 4 of the 7 road marches, 5 of the 7 road marches. The first one was 2 miles, the second one 3, the third one 5, the fourth one 7. Then you had a 12-mile and a 15. So 10, 11. So yeah, somewhere in there.
And you were only carrying a.
Yeah, I had to do. You have 80 pounds in your back, plus your weapon in your helmet weighs 8 pounds, just on. Your weapon, so, yeah, that's so everybody had the same.
Yeah.
On to 2 Samuel 3, this ain't very long, we got just a couple of scares. There was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. David grew stronger and stronger while the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. Sons were born to David in Hebron. His first was Amnon, remember him, of Ahinoam of Jezreel. His second, Chileab, Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. The third, Absalom, son of Maacah, daughter of the king of Talmai of Geshur. King Talmai of Geshur. So now he's got another wife here, Maacah. The fourth, Adonijah, son of Haggith. That's his next wife. The fifth, Shephatiah, son of Abital, another wife. The sixth, Ethrim of David's wife, Eglah, and another wife. These were born to David in Hebron. Amnon means teacher. Chileab means father's perfection. Oh, what a name. Absalom means father of peace. Maacah means to press. Go figure. My guess, that's the wife's name. So Talmai, the king of Geshur, means greatly furrowed. No, right. And Adonijah means my Lord. That Adonai is Lord and Yah is God's, beginning of God's name there. So my Lord. Haggith means festive. Abital means my father is the dew. Ephraim means people's excellence. Eglah, what a name for a wife. Heifer. I don't make this up, people. I just read text.
Now, he's born to be in that sheep.
We will find out, yes, that because of David's sin with Bathsheba, the child that was conceived, which was why Uriah had to die, kind of thing, would end up dying 8 days after. So,
But they have another that's Solomon.
yes, their second child would become. So, okay, so next week, the confidence of David's mighty men, the arrogance of Ishmael, and the vengeance of Joab. Okay. I told you, it reads just like. So let me go ahead and end our session today.
Just